The front end is almost finished, the frame is almost finished, and now another fun part, the engine. There was a time I wanted to install an M72 engine here, but even though a flathead engine is cool and I admire flatheads, it's quite small and rounded for this bike. And a Dnepr engine is big and angular, and that's my vision for this bike. A large engine and a small, thin frame, thin wheels, and a thin-looking dressing in general. Plus, this is not just an MT-1032 engine, it's an MT-1036. You're gonna ask me, what's the difference? Well, the difference is pretty small, but you can brag to everyone that this is a Dnepr 1036. 1036 differ from a 1032 or 1132 with the camshaft, cylinders, and pistons. Shortened cylinders in 1036 give a higher compression ratio, plus an angrier camshaft. All this delivers 4 more horses. From the very beginning, I didn't intend to completely overhaul this engine, because when you do an overhaul, you gotta do it correctly. I mean, grind the crankshaft, bore the cylinders, look for good pistons, change timing gears, etc. Long story short, you need to change half of the engine. But as practice shows, for example, that sidecar motorcycle right there, I deliberately assembled from used, clapped out parts. Rod bearings, piston rings, valves, bearings, everything I slammed this engine together with was worn to death. But it holds 50 psi of oil pressure when hot, and it pulls a sidecar full of all sorts of heavy junk. If you want to go for long distance rides, then yes, of course, you gotta overhaul the engine the proper way. Like I did here, and now it goes for long distances like a walk in a park, and everything is great with it. The roads in this country are bad, and you wouldn't like to go for a long distance ride on a hardtail frame, so I don't need a huge longevity here. But if you put good oil in the Dnepr and frequently change it, then even with a clapped out engine it'll run and drive for a very long time. Specifically with this motor, I'll do the following. I'll remove the oil pan, remove the timing cover, clean up the entire engine from the inside, change the rod bearings, change the piston rings, overhaul the heads. We'll check everything in the timing because sometimes awful things happen in there, such as unscrewed camshaft bolts and a camshaft just moves back and forth. I've seen a drain tube unscrewed from the head, and somehow it ended up in a block and was mixing there with the crankshaft. So I'll check this engine for any major breakdowns, install new gaskets, seals, put some good oil in it, and it'll run and drive just fine. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to overkill a Dnepr engine rebuild. Yes, this is not the correct way of doing things, but it's not worth of pouring a ton of money into a motor that'll just sit still for most of its life. And actually, the biggest problem of any Dnepr is not so much the quality of assembly from the factory, but negligence in using these bikes. Most of the Dneprs had driven 10 to 15,000 miles with the oil that was filled from the factory. And it never had been changed, it was only added to the level. And even if they had changed it, they changed it to Avtol, or if they were splurging to MG10. And both of these oils are basically junk by today's standards. And there was no concept of changing the oil, for example, every 5,000 kilometers. Folks were just satisfied with the fact that there's an oil level in the engine. Try to pour Avtol oil into some modern bike, for example a Kawasaki. It's not that it won't run for 20,000 kilometers, it'll probably seize during a warm-up stage. So Dnepr is still tenacious, and by the way, the engine internals are made of pretty good materials. We yet don't know what exactly is inside the engine, but it's already good news that the crankshaft hasn't been removed before, because this is the factory taken on a clutch. And we got more news. Looking at the fasteners on the front cover, we find out that it also hasn't been taken off. This is both good and bad news, because it's great that no one had slid their fingers into the engine before, but on the other hand, you can imagine in what condition is the centrifuge. We removed the timing cover, and the first thing that catches our eyes is that the breather has no play in the cover, which means that the engine's got a low mileage, despite the condition of the motorcycle itself. Yeah. We remove our centrifuge and see exactly what we expected to see. Man, I've disassembled many Dnepr engines, but I have never seen anything like this before. From here to here, this is all dirt. And there's still people who say, Dnepr centrifuge doesn't work. Next I removed the valve covers, and there... Yeah, why adjusting the valves? Removed both heads and found something interesting. I don't know what happened to the original head, the left one, but they replaced it with the Dnepr 11 head, and replaced it with a brand new one. The valves protrude into the combustion chamber exactly as much as they should, and overall this is a very low mileage head, so this head was actually new. Standard bore factory cylinders, standard pistons, oil deposits due to bad piston rings. There's a tiny wear in the cylinders, but it's very small, with new rings that'll ride for a very long time without boring the cylinders. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. All 4 bolts on a camshaft are loose. I've seen this 100 times. Accordingly, the camshaft together with the cover dangles back and forth. Then I wanted to take the clutch apart, and thanks to the impact screwdriver I managed to do it, but of course one single bolt didn't want to come out even with the impact driver. And again I had to hit it with a punch and, as always, drill out the staking. We disassembled the clutch and it also turns out to be in great condition, which again confirms the low mileage. Then I heated the block a little in the bearing area and removed the camshaft. There's a slight wear in the lifters, but the cementation layer is still there. Usually at Dnepr, which has around 10,000 miles on it, got the cementation to begin crumble, again due to poor engine care and bad oil. We pull off the oil pump gear and move on to the oil pan, but here we got something even more interesting waiting for us than what was in the centrifuge. And it's only fragments of a piston and piston rings. Well, it happens with the best of us. Here I remember the one bolt broke off when I was unbolting the cover, so I welded a nut onto the broken bolt, but the old bastard broke in half again and I had to drill it out and chase the threads. Both pistons are fine, which means that the piston that's in a pin exploded earlier. They replaced it, but they didn't bother removing the pieces out the engine. Yeah, that's right, who cares? I removed both connecting rods and began pulling off the crankshaft gear, but it was moving somehow reluctantly until I began to elegantly hold the engine with my leg. Next we prepare a socket wrench to unbolt the strongly tightened crankshaft cover bolts. But... oh well, yeah, this is KMZ. Oh, this one's tight. Nope, never mind, it's not tight. Don't ever do this, because you can either break off an ear or you will damage the gasket surface. In my case, it comes off almost by hand, so it's fine. We unbolt all the fasteners, pull off the cover, take out the crankshaft, and remove the oil pump. The clearance between gears is normal, the play in the seats is great. That's a good oil pump. Just gonna have to sand it down a little. There's practically no wear at all, just the traces of milling were taken off. We've sorted out the oil pump, let's move on to the crankshaft plugs. And in there it's interesting, just like in the centrifuge and the oil pan. Oh wow, fun. Under the second plug we have the same thing, and for company I unscrewed the small plug between the two journals. Of course it wasn't tight and started unscrewing by hand, but when it reached the staking it completely refused to get out. And it refused so much that even the impact driver bit broke. And I was compelled to drill again. Then I hammered an Allen wrench into the hole in the plug and it unscrewed easily. And after I chased the threads, all the parts went for a diesel bath. I suppose I'm not the only one who doesn't like washing engine parts, especially cylinder fins, but there's no way around it, alas. And now we can finally start assembling. So we start by chasing all the threads in the block, putting plugs in the crankshaft and staking them. We sand the oil pump housing down to attain a proper clearance. I do this on a piece of sandpaper placed on a glass. We warm up the camshaft gear and press it out with a copper drift. We change the bearing and put everything back together. We weigh the rods and pistons one by one and we see a huge difference in weight, especially in connecting rods. We bring everything to a common value using angle grinder activity and weigh them again. Now everything's fine. As you remember, two different heads were installed in this engine, one from a Dnepr 11, the second its own 1036. And I was thinking about which way to go, to install two heads with horizontal or with vertical carburetor mounts. On one hand, I love these with horizontal mounts from a Dnepr 11 because, well, this carb adapter is pretty freaking weird. Plus, you gotta put two more gaskets, so I simply don't like additional gaskets in these stupid adapters. And plus, I have this head. I already rebuilt it at some point, replaced the guides, installed new valves, everything is cut and lapped, we only have to wash it. So we have a pair of Dnepr 11 heads. But we have a 1036 with all original 1036 parts. That is, the camshaft, pistons, cylinders, everything is 1036. So I have already decided to install two 1036 heads so that everything's correct. So the thing with these adapters is when KMZ decided to switch from old K301 carburetors to new K63s, they had to change the carb mounts from vertical to horizontal. But they still had a ton of heads with vertical mounts in stock. That's why they invented these goofy adapters to fit the new carbs. It was way cheaper than remelting the old heads into the same heads but with horizontal carb mounts. So for several years they were using heads from their stock with vertical mounts until they ran out of them and then started installing new heads with horizontal carb mounts. I found such a head in my attic that hasn't been riding for a long time. Someone even cut the seats here but didn't change the guides. It's alright, I'll change the guides and recut the seats. The most important thing is that all threads are good here. These threads, usually they uproot them clean. Drain tube threads, spark plug threads, it's got no cracks. It's a good head. While the heads were heating up, I took the guides out of the freezer, knocked out the old guides and installed new ones. This time I chose cheap guides and didn't bother with car valve guides. Next I went through the guides with a reamer and started cutting the seats. I cut the seats on the left head. Here's the thin 45-degree angle on the intake. Here's the angle in the exhaust. You don't want to make them too narrow. In the end, they should be around 2 millimeters. If it's too narrow, the valve won't have time to transfer the heat, and if it's too wide, there may not be enough pressure to provide a tight seal, and the valve lapping will fail faster. I made the 45 angle first, then 15, then 75. In the end, I smoothed it with a finishing cutter. Having cut the seats on the second head, I began lapping the valves. At first, I decided to lap them with my new collet clamp wrench, but it turned out to take too much time, so I got bored and finished lapping them in the old-fashioned way. We glue any plate with a slot for a screwdriver onto the valve with resin and lap the valve in a few seconds. Well, that's it. I finally washed all these parts and now it's my favorite part, assembling the engine. And really, I just love building engines. I hate taking them apart and love putting them back together. Everything has been prepared. I overhauled the heads. I'll have a new front crank bearing. I'll be assembling everything with a thread lock and use the most regular sealant. For such work, I don't see a point of buying some kind of expensive RTV. I need to fill all the little nicks, dents, and uneven spots, and this sealant will cope the job. These are the carburetor adapters. I thought about installing a deep oil pan. I've had it laying around for 100 years. Still can't decide to put it on one of my bikes, because they're all pretty low, and this junk reduces the ground clearance even more. Overall, it's pretty much useless, except that it takes more oil, which just heats up slowly. So I'll install a regular steel pan, because we already have a tiny ground clearance. Piston rings, seals. About these pushrod tube seals, as folks from the market call them barrels. Man, why barrels? But okay, let them be barrels. Of course, red rubber is better than black. Red ones last much longer and don't dry out and crack like black ones, but man, a simple engine looks so stupid with them red ones, like some kind of coloring book. So I'll use ordinary black seals, both with the valve covers and pushrod tubes. Seriously, it's way easier for me to dump off the heads and replace these cracked seals than stand this garbage on my engine. Rod bearings, spring washers, fuel hose. Ignition will be Sovec. I used to show off and put Saruman, but now I realize that this is probably the most convenient thing. Just install it on the bike and it works. Cork oil pan gasket, because all rubber ones, red or black, are always being squeezed out. And a kit of Paranite gaskets. Now about the engine oil. In bikes that I ride for long distance trips, I put Zig semi-synthetic. After heating up, it almost doesn't lose viscosity, holds pressure well. In general, it's a good oil. And in my dailies, I pour cheap semi-synthetic. In this engine, I'll pour cheap mineral oil so it runs for a day or two with it and get everything thoroughly washed on the inside, and then I'll change it with fresh semi-synthetic. While assembling any unit, I lubricate everything inside with thick transmission oil. First things first, we press in the flywheel seal. I warm up the bearing very slightly and press it onto the crankshaft using a hammer and a copper drift. We insert the crankshaft, bolt the oil pump onto the crankshaft cover, put the cover in place and torque it. Next, we bend the lock tabs, insert the woodruff key, slightly warm up the gear and press it in place. Same goes for the oil pump gear. Torque it down and don't forget to put the cotter key. Next, we warm up the block, lubricate the camshaft real good, set the timing marks, and insert the camshaft into the block. We set it in place, and bolted down. Instead of thread lock, I decided to use an impact driver and staking. They haven't let me down yet. Now we assemble the centrifuge. We put it in place, bolt it down, and bend the lock tab. We install the sun breather and pour plenty of oil on everything. Next, we degrease gasket surfaces, apply a bit sealant, and put the gasket in place. We throw the lid on and bolt it down. But then we remember the one bolt broke off during this assembly. We install the bolt that had been found accidentally in place and move on to the oil pan. Install the oil pickup tube and its screen. We hammer the oil pan flange flat and bolt it in place. Everything is simple here. Next is the camshaft seal and we install the ignition along the way. These are the spark plug wires that come with this ignition. Brand new, carbon core, they look fine. But they are blue. The funniest thing would be how these blue wires would look with the red pushrod tube seals. It looked like a Christmas tree. And in order not to install them, I have two options. Either old, used car wires or put these wires in heat shrink. But I don't have a suitable diameter of heat shrink. But here's another option. Wrap them up with cloth tape. Having checked the ignition for functionality, I began wrapping up the wires with cloth tape. Well, that's before and after. Looks pretty neat. Next, we install the flywheel and torque it real good. Then we can assemble the clutch. Before staking it, we put the tranny on one more time just to make sure that it goes on well. Then we install connecting rods with bearings and don't forget to cotter key the conrod bolts. The most important thing here is that everything is very clean and good lubrication. I don't really like installing the crankshaft with the conrod, so I install the rods separately when the crank is in a block already. We install the rings. Slightly warm up the piston, because wrist pins in this engine are a slight press fit. Install the wrist pin, and don't forget about snap rings. A diesel bath again. Couple of words about the drainage tube. This is a Dnepr 11 tube. It's slightly tapered at the end. And this one without a taper is a Dnepr 1036 and earlier. The difference is that the early Dneprs take a felt sealer like a felt O-ring. This thing goes in there all the way. Dnepr 11 and later have this rubber O-ring from the factory. And if you install such an O-ring on a 1036 Dnepr or earlier, this drainage tube simply will not fit in there. So I'm gonna have to grind it to be tapered. And a couple more things. Here this felt seal sits, and in an early block this groove is much shallower than in a Dnepr 11 block. Accordingly, this seal, if you insert it here, it won't be flush. It sticks out. Because of this, the cylinder won't sit completely in place. It'll be twisted. You may exclaim, come on, 4 studs will pull it in, it's not going anywhere. But that's the point, it has nowhere to go. So in general, it has to be cut almost in half. Having ground the drainage tube, we install it onto the head. I usually do light honing using fine sandpaper. Don't rush throwing tomatoes. I've heard that dragster and NASCAR drivers have done this during emergency engine repairs and everything worked great for them. The point of honing is to trap oil particles on the cylinder walls and micro scratches, and it doesn't matter how the micro scratches were made. We do preliminary top-end assembly to make sure that the pushrod tube seals are not being squeezed too much, because you can adjust the tension while the head's off. Everything looks decent, so we take it apart again. I decided to go through the lifter holes with a needle. Here everything is nice, but here, we don't have a hole here. That's right, one's enough. We're just gonna start drilling it so it looks like the hole is there. It's fine. We select a good Soviet lifter from my stash, lubricate it, and put it in place. Degrease surfaces. Cut the drain tube seal. Next, according to the standard, RTV, seal RTV. And gasket. Clock the piston rings. Lubricate the piston and cylinder. And install the cylinder in place. Put the cylinder head on and torque it. Then we do the same on the other side. Then we sand the rockers flat and install them on the heads. Next, we adjust the valves and install the rocker covers. Now it's the transmission turn. I change all the seals and O-rings and bolt it onto the motor. Next, we put the generator on, tighten it, and install the carburetor adapters. And yeah, they didn't give up without a fight and had to be ground with the grinder. Now we gotta find carburetors. Ooh, haha. Install the carburetors and we have an engine that can be mounted in the frame. We throw the engine in. Pour oil. Top up the carburetors with gasoline. We kick several times to raise the oil pressure. And connect the ignition. Not enough idle. Increase it a little. And well, we fired up the engine, it runs smooth and sound. Oil pressure is 60 psi at idle, I couldn't be happier. Thank you very much for watching, see you next video.